Members of the so-called bipartisan Gang of Six today stood before a group of their fellow senators, briefing them on the work they've done so far toward a debt deal. Idaho Senator Mike Crapo is one of them, and he joins us here in studio. Good evening, Senator.
Good evening.
Let's start, first of all, with a broad overview and the reaction to it up on Capitol Hill today.
Now, we had a very positive reaction. We had about 50 senators, probably equally divided among the Republicans and Democrats, and overall I would say it was much more positive than I expected, and I think that's a good sign. The overview is this is a comprehensive debt, I'd say really a shift in the American fiscal policy dynamic that is much broader than just the debt ceiling battle that we're having. In fact, we haven't brought this out as a part of the debt ceiling battle, even though it's going on right now. This is an effort to deal with our debt crisis, and we put everything on the table, which means that we are looking at about a $3.5 to a $4.5 trillion bill, which will be a very good first step, but not even the only step that we need to reduce our debt crisis.
Largely based on the Bowles-Simpson plan, the Deficit and Debt Commission. There are some changes to that, but as you take a look at tax reform, for example, a couple of specifics. Simplify the tax code with 3 tax brackets, 8 to 12%, 14 to 22%, 23 to 29%. I suppose that'll be nailed down. Permanently repeal the AMT, alternative minimum tax. That's $1.7 trillion. Net tax relief, according to this write-up, is $1.5 trillion, and the corporate tax rate drops from 35 to anywhere between 23 and 29%. It seems like you are restructuring the tax code overall.
Yes, this is probably the most powerful tax reform that we have seen in decades, maybe in way longer than that. And the concept here is that you reform the code, broaden the base, reduce the rates, and by doing so very strongly stimulate growth in the economy. Utilize the growth from the economic stimulation that occurs to provide the revenue for retiring the debt, and frankly make America more competitive and make our tax system much less expensive to comply with.
As you are aware, since you are now out with this plan, there are already people talking about it, saying there are big questions. Americans for Tax Reform said this, put out a release just moments ago. The Gang of Six plan is not written in legislative language. It is an outline. It punts many decisions to the Senate Finance Committee. It deals in ranges rather than specifics. One is reminded of the dangers of pronouncing oneself satisfied with a product before it comes clearly into focus. Is this vague, or is it specific?
No, I would say that it's not vague, but it is correct to say that we create a two-step process, and the first step is what I've called the straitjacket, if you will. The first step is very specific and very real. We set the parameters for tax reform that must be met. We set the parameters of reducing our discretionary and our entitlement spending that must be met. Then we allow the relevant committees that have jurisdiction to meet those targets. But we put together an enforcement mechanism that is so powerful that I don't think there is any way that anyone can realistically argue that those targets will not be met.
What is the prospect? Now, let's say you get the 60 votes you need in the Senate, and it sounds like you're on your way there. What is the prospect of getting something like this through the House of Representatives that has talked about not increasing taxes at all and has been pretty firm? In fact, tonight we'll vote on the cut, cap, and balance bill.
Well, first of all, as I said earlier, we've been working on this for 6 months, and this is a proposal to deal with our debt crisis. It may or may not end up being used in some way as a vehicle to help deal with our debt ceiling battle that we're working on right now. But I frankly think the cut, cap, and balance bill, which I'm a co-sponsor of, should pass, and I hope it does, and that this plan passes too. And frankly, we'll need several more plans to pass before we get out of this crisis. If we get 60 votes in the Senate for this bill, I think that it will get a tremendous amount of momentum because of the powerful reform that it provides in our tax code and the controls that it puts into place to make sure that we stick to budgets in the future.
Does the President help when he talks about this plan?
Well, we've got to get everybody involved and supportive. I personally would like to see us get this plan moved forward in the Senate and see where we can go from there. But like I say, once you put a plan out, you can't control who is going to step in and engage in the negotiation.
And last thing, on entitlements, does it deal with entitlements specifically?
Yes, it does. Again, in the same way that I talked about with regard to the tax code, and that is we put together about $500 billion of health care entitlement controls or reductions in spending. The details of how to do that will be worked out by the relevant committees of jurisdiction. But we have ironclad targets that will be met and an enforcement mechanism that makes certain that they are achieved that will be adopted if the bill is passed in the first instance.
Okay, Senator Crapo, thank you very much for the time.
Thank you.
Look forward to an update.
My privilege.